Awesome. Welcome, everyone. My name is Rebecca Coakley, and I have the tremendous pleasure of being your host today and also being the U.S. Disability Rights Program Officer here at the Ford Foundation. This event, Reporting with Honor, a guide for covering veterans with disabilities, is truly a groundbreaking event. I came to Ford, this is like halfway through year 2 at this point, because several years ago when our CEO joined us, he was very adamant in his commitment to funding issues around social justice. And when he talked about social justice, Darren talked about racial justice and gender justice and economic justice and LGBT justice. And to no surprise, left off people with disabilities. And so we did what every grassroots community does. We trolled him epically. And unlike a lot of recipients of trolling, our CEO had the foresight to invite us all in and talk to us. And that began Darren Walker's longstanding commitment to disability rights and justice as an area of work here at the Ford Foundation. When it came to the development of our grant-making strategy, we actually asked the community directly what it was that they wanted us to fund. And we heard loud and clear that 2 key pieces were critical to the evolution of issues facing people with disabilities across all various communities. We needed to build the field, and we needed to drive narrative change. Now, most folks may not be aware, but the community of people that are veterans and the broad-based disability community have not always gotten along. In some ways, their relationship can be seen as siblings in the back of a 12-hour car ride that has suddenly become an 18-hour car ride, hopefully with Disneyland on the other end, that has broken down on the grapevine in like 112-degree heat. And to me, that has always been one of the biggest tragedies. I think so often there have been a multitude of reasons that our social movements find themselves divided, that they don't see themselves in each other's movements where we clearly exist. And when my first conversation with Zach and the team at Military Veterans for Journalism, it became so clear to me that this was an opportunity to do something different. And so I actually, hopped on the phone with my other colleague, Kara Reedy, who will be joining us virtually. And I said, what would it look like if we actually sort of piloted the grant making around a disability journalism organization and a military veterans journalism organization? What if we grew them collaboratively, in conjunction with each other, in conversation? Could we bypass a lot of the historical drama, nya and gnashing of teeth and fighting for money, and actually build something that was collaborative, that was cooperative, that modeled the mantra of the disability rights movement that came out of our activist brothers and sisters in South Africa fighting against apartheid, which is nothing about us without us. And so it's with that I'm thrilled to be here with all of you today. The last thing I want to do before I kick off this wonderful panel is also take a moment to acknowledge people with disabilities that are in the room and have joined us virtually. Whether or not it is safe for you to self-identify publicly or professionally, because let's be real, there's a lot of stigma out in this world, and it does a lot of harm. We're happy that you're here. Both of our communities are infinitely strengthened by your presence, and it's a blessing to be in community with all of you today. So we're going to turn this over to our phenomenal panel, and I'm going to turn it over to my dear colleague, Zach, from Military Veterans and Journalism.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I appreciate it. And we are incredibly grateful for the support of the Ford Foundation. It has been quite a journey for us as we've continued to grow as an organization with the Ford Foundation, as well as with Disabled Journalists Association. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to be here and to listen into the conversation, which we'll get into shortly. I just have a few opening remarks. So I'm Zach Badorf, the Executive Director and the co-founder of Military Veterans and Journalism, and I'm proud to represent our more than 700 members, along with my co-founder, Russell Midori, sitting over there. We provide community for our robust mentorship program. We have a range of internships and fellowships with outlets like NPR and McClatchy. We have some terrific training programs, for example, on investigative journalism. And so over the past year and a half, thanks to the Ford Foundation, we have been working to improve the representation of disabilities in the news media, especially as it relates to disabled veterans. This work is very personal to me. I identify as a disabled veteran, and I see it as a strength. I'd like to share a personal story of how being a disabled veteran and being a journalist, how this was received by leaders within the news industry. So a few years back, when I was applying for a job with the New York Times, I mentioned in my cover letter that I am a service-disabled veteran. They brought me in for an interview, and one of the senior people there conducting the interview, he looked me up and down, and he said something to the effect of, "So, what's your disability?" It's true, I do not have a physically manifested disability, and this person clearly knew that. So they were basically asking me to share my mental health diagnosis. It's intrusive, and one could argue that it's also an illegal question. Now, this is complicated. There's nuance there. I'm proud of my accomplishments. I'm proud of my service, despite the personal challenges, including mental health, that resulted from that. Yet, I also don't want to get into that with a complete stranger. And I also fear the very real stereotypes that exist of being labeled as broken, among other things. More than anything, this experience is indicative of a culture ignorant about the military, veterans, and for that matter, people with disabilities. And that ignorance translates into reporting. It also speaks, I should add, more broadly to coastal elitism. Vets don't always go to fancy schools like the Columbia Journalism School. We can't always afford to live in New York City for an internship. It is unpaid. And this intersects with another issue related to classism within the ranks of America's newsroom. So there are a lot of challenges to be addressed here. And the result is this. If you look at the American military population, about 7.5% of Americans have served in the armed forces. If you look at America's newsrooms, just 2% of media workers have served in the armed forces. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not trying to pick on the New York Times here. We're very thankful. There are people within the institution, including this room, who are here to push the organization, the institution, to do better. But I think it's fair to say that there's still work to be done. As we look at publicly available information, we can see that their staff has roughly 1,900 journalists. But as best we can tell, less than 10 of those 1,900 are veterans. That's 0.5%. And they can do better, and the broader news industry can do better too. When I talked to the head of another large, prominent national outlet, this person struggled to name just 3 veterans on their staff. This is another organization with hundreds and hundreds of staffers. It's pathetic. So the point is, this is not just limited to some of these outlets. It's an industry problem, even when there are resources. I should also pause to acknowledge the power dynamics here. When I was actively working as a journalist, I could not call out these outlets for these problems. I relied on them for my livelihood. So I feel like it's my obligation to speak up and to demand more on behalf of my fellow veterans, and to work with outlets like the Times to acknowledge the inadequacies, to bridge the divide, and to build opportunities to grow together. We are making inroads, and we are here to celebrate those inroads. We formed, in partnership with the Ford Foundation, the Disability Speakers Bureau, and we're here to share some best practices of what the Speakers Bureau has learned about disability reporting, again with a focus on veterans. Our Speakers Bureau is comprised of 11 military veterans, most of them disabled, who have taken what they've learned in their own learning process into newsrooms across the nation, teaching journalists how to better engage with and improve their coverage of disabled communities. We have several of the Speakers Bureau members here today. First, in pink, we have Caron Lenoir. She's the founder of Caranism Media and a Navy and Army veteran. A formerly homeless disabled veteran, she uses her experiences to inform her advocacy for the diverse voices of women and women veterans, as well as for mental health care. Our second speaker is Donna Cole, in the middle there. She is an award-winning multimedia and investigative journalist. Donna is a veteran of the U.S. Navy, a mom, a breast cancer survivor with a passion for wildlife photography. She also is a raptor rescuer, responding to eagles, owls, hawks, falcons, and vultures in Maryland that require medical assistance, which I think is pretty cool. We also have on the panel Jimmy White, IV, who is a Navy veteran. He is a public speaker and award-winning youth veteran advocate. Jimmy here is also a TEDx speaker, a Leadership Philadelphia alumnus, and a George W. Bush Center presidential scholar. At the far end, joining us is Russell Midori. He's the co-founder of Military Veterans in Journalism. He's a Marine Corps vet who is now a photographer and editor at Pix 11 here in New York. He focuses primarily on covering social unrest and international affairs. Now, so far, these speakers have conducted training to about a dozen local and national newsrooms, as well as the Report for America cohort, which is another great partner of ours. But I should acknowledge as well that we reached out to about 250 news outlets across the country, local and national. We called them, we emailed them. Russell even knocked on doors in person trying to get their attention. And we only were able to get 12 of them to bother to set aside the time. That's, again, less than 5%. This is free training. We wanted 60 minutes of their time. I should pause to say that if your newsroom wants training, let me know. We would be happy to host you. And with that, I will introduce Kara Reedy of the Disabled Journalists Association. She was one of our trainers because she herself is a journalist and disability advocate with a focus on disability reporting. She's the co-founder, as mentioned, of the Disabled Journalists Association, a group that aims to improve the representation and employment of disabled journalists. Her journalism has been featured in various publications, including The Guardian, The Independent, The Huffington Post, and others. She's joining us virtually. So we're going to hear from the amazing panel here shortly, but I'll pass it to Kara in just a moment. And I'll just conclude with this. I want to say this is just the beginning for us. We are incredibly grateful for those of you who are working to change the news industry. We want to address all these challenges together and overcome these incredible challenges and to thus result in better reporting on disability. Thank you very much, and over to Kara.
Hi, I'm Kara Reedy. It's really nice to be here virtually. I'm sorry I couldn't be in person. I usually like to start off anytime I talk to anybody, but running down with some stats about disabled people. And some of you may already know these stats, but that's okay. We're going to go over them again anyway. The first slide is 26% of the population in America is disabled. That's over a quarter, and that is according to the CDC. I think that those numbers are actually conservative, and with COVID, our numbers are probably larger than 26%. So think about how a minority that's over a quarter of the population, think about that, keep that in your mind. Next slide. Rates of disability in working age adults by race. So Native Americans have the highest rate of disability, and Black Americans come right underneath that. So when you think about disabled people and think about the coverage that you see, are you seeing a lot of Native American disability stories? Are you seeing a lot of Black American disability stories? And how are they represented? Next slide. People with disabilities live in poverty at more than twice the rate of people without disabilities. People with disabilities make up approximately 12% of the US working age population. However, they account for more than half of those living in long-term poverty. More than 65% of the 17.9 million working age adults with disabilities participate in at least one safety net or income support program. So we often think of, I think a lot of times we don't really put all of these things together: Black, Native American, disability, poverty, they're all together and they all inform each other. So next slide. School to prison pipeline. Black students account for 15.5% of all public school students, but are 39% of students suspended from school, an overrepresentation of about 23%. Disabled students account for 12% of public school students, but were 20% more likely to be suspended. They made up 25% of the out-of-school suspensions. Disabled Black students account for 19% of all K through 12 disabled students, but are nearly 36% of students with disabilities suspended from school, an overrepresentation of 17%. Again, think of all of the poverty, prison, schools, disability. Now, here we go with mass incarceration. 24% of all prisoners reported participating in special education classes. Disability rates in prisons: 29% of federal prisoners have a disability, 40% of state prisoners have a disability, 13.7% of federal prisoners have a cognitive disability. A cognitive disability is defined as having trouble remembering things. 24% of state inmates have a cognitive disability. Now we go to homelessness. The number of chronically homeless individuals, that's defined as individuals with disabilities experiencing homelessness for long periods of time, increased by 16% between 2020 and 2022. Nearly 4 out of every 10 people experiencing homelessness identified as Black, African American, or African. Next slide. Then I come to Jordan Neely. So the reason why I brought him up is because we all know his story now. We know all of the things that have happened to him. But here's the thing, he's not rare. I just went through all of the facts to show you that all of these people are falling through. So when we have reporting, I go to the New York Post first, because this is the worst. Shocking video shows NYC subway passenger putting unhinged man in deadly chokehold. He's unhinged. Why is he, who uses that language around someone that is experiencing a mental health crisis? Also, it clearly is saying, hey, he kind of deserved this treatment. I don't know how many people live in New York, but if you ride the subway, you're always riding the subway with mentally ill people and mentally ill people who are in crisis. And when this happened, we all acted like this isn't normal and this isn't normally how we live. So then we go to the New York Times and how 2 men's disparate paths crossed in a killing on the F train. Like, one guy didn't kill the other. Like, one guy killed him. And why aren't we defining it like that? And it's because we do not think of disabled people as full humans. And even in newsrooms, this is the coverage that comes out. So then the next article, which actually was a good article, Jordan Neely was already dead. New York reckons with a homeless epidemic and a killing. And I find that headline really interesting because throughout this article, they go through all of the systems that were broken that left Jordan Neely on the streets. Yes, his mother died. Yes, he ended up with mental health issues. Of course he did. His mother died and was thrown off a bridge. And so we call them system cracks. These aren't cracks. And we act like they're cracks. And when we put the numbers in the articles, we act like, oh, it's a little bit of a crack, but it's 26% of the population. We know that disabled people live in poverty at twice the rate. That's not a crack. That's a giant hole. And this is the problem with what's happening in media today, is we don't, when something happens, when a disabled person dies, we are ready. We have a requiem for it. We know exactly where to find the information. We know the rates of disabled people in poverty, homelessness, all this stuff. And then it dies. All the coverage dies after that. And I'm like, but you literally know that there's cracks here. Why aren't you calling all of these systems so that there's not another Jordan Neely? Because Jordan Neely didn't do this to himself. There was a man who killed him. He did that. But also, we're also responsible for this. Journalism is responsible for this. We villainize people with disabilities all the time. We allow politicians to say horrible things without going checked. Kathy Hochul, before she had any information, she softened her opinion, her position, but before she softened it, she said, actions have consequences about Jordan. So because you are having a mental health crisis, the consequence is death. And no one challenged her on that right away. And that should be immediate. That should be immediate, and that should be a reflex. We don't seem to have that reflex with disability. We have it with everything else. And I'm not saying every other issue is perfect, but we have it with everything else. At least some sort of reflex. With disability, it's like, well, they were almost dead, or they were gonna die, or they were disabled. And we don't review, we don't, when there's elections, we don't check for disabled people. We don't report on them as a viable voting group when it's 26% of the population. But how often do we hear, hey, we went to Iowa and we went into a diner to go find out what Joe Schmo thinks about this? Great. Does Joe Schmo have a disability? What is his life like? How is he voting? Why don't we don't come out with that? And so the trends that I'm supposed to be reporting on are bad. And there are better options, and like there were better articles than these that I could have come out with, but generally we don't report very well on it. So and it sounds like I'm coming down really hard on everyone. And you know what? I am. Because what I value so much about being a journalist is that we're supposed to be holding power to account, and we know how to do it. We're just not doing it. And we don't do it in any kind of way. When I go and train newsrooms and I bring up some of these points, everybody's like, what? I didn't know any of that. Or where did you find this? And it's because we're just not clocking for it. And when you cross disability with military veterans, it's the same. I was surprised there were no articles about Jordan Neely's killer that said, he was in active duty and he had PTSD, and so that's why he choked him out. And it's, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but probably not. Like, disability is not a reason for criminality, and we often associate it with it. So when you think about those prison numbers are because people are being targeted, put into prison because of their disability. They are not criminals because they're disabled. They're being criminalized. And I think that's the biggest takeaway that I have from my couple of years of training newsrooms, is that we always frame, and I put we in there because I'm part of the problem. I've been part of the problem, even though I'm disabled. We put the onus on the disabled person to act in the way that non-disabled people act, when we know that's not possible, when we know the system is not built for disabled people. And that's what we all need to think about, is reframing, repositioning, Instead of waiting until someone dies, check the system first. You know how to do it. Thank you so much for this time. I'm going to cut it off now and pass it to the next speaker.
Oh, that's me. Hello. My name is Karan Lenoir. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here with you guys. I am a formerly homeless disabled veteran. And the question I get the most when I mention that, because I'm not ashamed, is how did you become homeless? And the truth is, lack of access to care. Many people don't understand that until the Obama administration, women did not have equal health care in the VA system. My day would look like this. I would have to wake up at 6 a.m. to catch a cab, to catch a bus an hour and a half away to get to the VA. I would have to wait until 2 o'clock to get a bus back. If I missed that 2 o'clock bus, I would have to wait at a gas station where they clearly sold meth and wouldn't get home until 10 o'clock at night for a checkup. I am multidimensionally disabled. You don't see my disability, you get all this. But I am no less disabled than any of my colleagues or any of you out there. I am also a Black woman. Shocker. Very proud of who I am. I'm very proud of my service. But there are nuances when it comes to addressing the needs of veterans and when it comes to speaking truthfully about what we experience. The first question I'm asked when I go in for any kind of services is, where's your husband? Or who is your husband? I gave him back to his mama. But as a woman, as a veteran, as a disabled person, as a mother, as a grandmother, it's hard enough having a body that betrays me. It's even harder not being recognized for who I am and how I move in the world. Intersectionality is not something we talk about often. Intersectionality is really the cross between the communities that you belong to and where they meet. So as a Black woman and a veteran, I have one kind of experience. As a disabled person, I have another kind of experience. As a Black disabled veteran, I have another kind of experience. All of them make me whole. I am not fragmented. I'm not this part and this part and this part. I'm all of this. It's not the way we speak about veterans. It's not the respect that we deserve or that we've earned. We deserve to be called by our names. We deserve to be acknowledged for our rank and our service. And we deserve to be fully realized humans in spite of whether or not our body betrays us. Because many of you will never know. Invisible disability is something that's very, very real. It means that if I go into a restroom and I need to use the facility for disabled and somebody is in there changing their clothes, I get looked at like I'm crazy because I need bars to stand up. There are days when I cannot get up. There are days when I cannot speak up. I deserve access to care. We all deserve access to care. We also have the right to our dignity. And that's not something you often see in reporting. You see the images of white men under bridges when we speak about veterans. You see images of people in wheelchairs. You do not see people who look like people. It's bad enough that those people exist and are dehumanized. But to be fully realized and further dehumanized adds insult to injury. And as journalists, I love what Kara said. We know how to speak truth to power, but we don't do it. We don't acknowledge even our colleagues. And it is pathetic how people thank us for our service, but won't hire us because of our service. Every time there's a mass shooting in this country, the first thing they point out is whether or not that person served. Every time something happens to a black man or a black woman in this country, the question is whether or not they served. It is bizarre to live in a world where you are invisible. It is bizarre to live in a world where my disabilities are questioned. And just like Zach said, it is bizarre to be asked in an interview what your disability is. It's wrong. It's wrong. We can't just honor veterans in speech. I appreciate people who thank me for my service, but I would really love to see more action behind it. And we have the power of words. We have the power of clarity. We have the power of research far beyond civilians. We have the ability to change the narrative when it comes to disabled people, disabled veterans, because that's another intersection. I'm going to close with this. I started by saying I became homeless because of lack of access to care. That continues, and hopefully the VA is making lots of changes to change that. But when you have nowhere to go, when your service is not honored, and you're sick, you can't work. I have children. Well, they're grown now, but when you can't work, it takes the pride of life out of you. When you're not acknowledged, it dehumanizes us. It dehumanizes our communities and those we serve. So I just ask for thoughtfulness, for kindness, for consideration, but most of all for clarity when it comes to speaking of people with disabilities. And if you don't know, ask. Thank you.
You're amazing.
You want to stand up? Or you?
No, I think I'm okay.
Okay.
If they get me on. Slide. Yeah, okay. Okay, I'm talking to you today about accurate representation of disabled veterans and why it matters, although you've already heard a lot of reasons why it matters. Next slide. Next slide. I'm Donna Cole. I'm a disabled veteran of the U.S. Navy. I'm also an award-winning investigative and multimedia reporter. Next slide, please. I might not look like I have look like I have disabilities, and like Zach has said and Corona said, I have invisible disabilities. They exist, but you can't see them. And what this means is I might not look like I need accommodations in the workplace, or at the hotel, or here, or elsewhere, but I actually do. Next slide, please. What issues affect disabled veterans? Just about everything. Everything, actually, not even just about. Politics, recreation, disasters, housing, and food, to name a few. It's all of this, plus a misconception of who a disabled veteran is. We don't all have a seat at the table. And I don't know if you can see who that man in the middle is, but what I'm about to say is, it is Lieutenant Dan. And would Lieutenant Dan, not Gary Sinise, or excuse me, it's Gary Sinise, Lieutenant Dan. Would Lieutenant Dan, not Gary Sinise, be meeting with the head of NSA in Fort Meade, the biggest employer in my county? Next slide. Forrest Gump and Lieutenant Dan are the images of disabled veterans that we're used to seeing in media and entertainment. Would Lieutenant Dan be able to get a job on a shrimp boat if it wasn't owned by his best friend? Would Forrest Gump have gotten into the U.S. Army had he been diagnosed with autism? And that's not to say that he's autistic, although there's a lot of chatter and has been a lot of chatter about it on the internet. We don't all have a seat at the table, is what I'm saying. Regardless, we do tend to focus on male veterans in this country in media, news, entertainment, healthcare, and everything. Next slide, please. Do any of you have a cell phone on you, a smartphone? Can everyone take out their smartphone? On Google, go to Google and do a search for veteran, and then go to images. You're probably now seeing two women, if you're seeing any women at all, and they both appear to be active duty. A veteran is someone that has served. Active duty is someone that is currently serving. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret here. Most often, veterans don't wear uniforms. Do you see any women, just out of curiosity? Are you? No. Yeah. Some of you see one. Okay, so I'm going to let you in on another little secret. Women veterans exist, and in all generations. Black, Hispanic, Asian American, and other minority veterans exist, and in all generations. Now do a search for disabled veteran while you have Google open, and look at images. Next slide, please, if it's. One might think you have to be in a wheelchair and be male to be a disabled veteran. Not every disabled veteran was disabled at war. Not every veteran that has PTSD served in combat. Not every veteran that has PTSD is male. Some veterans have service-connected disabilities, and some veterans have disabilities that aren't related to service. Next slide, please. But we have to deal with a completely dysfunctional healthcare system in the VA, and not every veteran even gets healthcare from the VA. This is surprising to a lot of people, I think. It can take months or years to get healthcare through the VA. Did you know that therapy for PTSD in the VA is capped at 20 weeks with one provider? That's it. You have to change providers if you're not suddenly healed in 20 weeks from PTSD. And nobody likes changing providers. Next slide, please. What happens when we're invisible? It's more like what doesn't happen. We're not being included at the table. We're not being covered in stories. We're not getting benefits. We're not able to get jobs, housing, healthcare, and the list goes on. Next slide, please. We need veterans in newsrooms. We need people with disabilities in newsrooms. We need a lot more diversity in newsrooms. We need to be included in stories, even about topics other than disability. We need accurate representation of veterans, and we need accurate representation of disabilities, even the invisible ones. How many of you have disabilities? If you don't now, all of you will be if you live long enough. I'm Donna Cole. Thank you very much for having me today.
I'm a walker and a talker, so you guys, I'm a minister too. So, in the military, titles matter. Next slide. I've been very blessed to have many titles over my childhood, over my career. Many of them earned through service and hard work. I can tell you that every time I get introduced, I always start with South Philly native. South Philly represent every time. Go Eagles, go Sixers, go Birds. I can tell you that second title right there, Navy veteran, not something that I adopted when I got out of the military. You see, when we look at journalism and media, it's a reflective lens of our society. And when I got out in 2006, it was during the Walter Reed crisis, it was during the influx of PTSD, and it was in the middle of one of our worst wars possible that was going to continue on for 22 years. In the media, I didn't see anyone that looked like me, talked like me, or wanted to be in service to my country, even though I've taken off that uniform, like me. So I never used the term veteran on my job applications, on my resume, even when I spoke to my father, who's also a veteran and also a Samariner. We just would not talk about our service. We weren't proud of it. But I can honestly say that now I have this tribe of amazing veterans, especially here in the MVJ program, that I now can see empower me, that can now say that I'm a veteran, I have service issues, and I have a tribe, and we're doing better. Titles matter because we earn these titles. Do not go to an enlisted service member or an enlisted veteran and say, oh, you were an officer, and salute me. I would be offended and say I was a dirty blue shirt. Don't go to an officer who went through 4 years of school and served our country for 8 years and says, oh, you are an officer, not a big deal. No, they earned their rank. They're the reason why I will salute them. is earned. Next slide. The same way that our titles are earned, our benefits are earned. And unfortunately, so often, because of media representation or the negative context that we hear about a service-connected disabled veteran, we don't get the help that we need. I'm one of those people. I'm a youth and veteran advocate. I've won national awards, TED Talks, yada, 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 yada. Last year, an amazing friend of mine, Lucy Bustamante, who's an NBC 10 reporter in Philadelphia and also a Navy spouse, pulled me aside and said, Jimmy, I want to talk about military mental health in veterans. Can you do a story with me? I said, perfect, sure, no problem. And I had all the statistics down, 22 suicides a day and yada, yada, and all this stuff. And we get down and she sat me in an interview. And the very first question she asked me is, Jimmy, have you ever struggled with mental health? I had been out of the military for 15 years. Lucy was the very first person in any capacity that ever asked me if I had mental health problems. I did. I have PTS. I ball into a fetal position in my bed whenever it's too cold in my house because it reminds me of my time on a submarine. I get boat mirrors. Boat mirrors is when you wake up in the middle of the night. Zach, I don't know if you get these. Wake up in the middle of the night thinking that the boat's on fire, so you jump up to try to take it out, which, as you can imagine, freaked my wife out for the first 5 years. I was one of those people that did not seek help because of the courage and empowerment that my friends have given me. I'm now seeking it, and I'm now receiving it. I can speak generally that no disabled veteran wants a hand out. We want a hand up so that we can be better and we can be productive citizens of this country. Next slide. So what can we do now in journalism, in media, in society as a whole to begin to address some of these issues? The very first term up there, the first time I heard it, I was like, oh, am I supposed to say that out loud? But inspirational porn is a real thing. And actually, I remember Kara Sessions specifically about inspirational porn. And I say it like this, it's like porn, like I don't have a good definition for it, but I know what it looks like when I see it. Inspirational porn, the same exact thing. If I see a picture of a disabled veteran that is running a 5K with prosthetics on, and the caption says, he's running, why aren't you? If I see a picture of a Vietnam veteran who's lost a limb, and it says they served our country, can you give them a like and a comment and a thumbs up? That to me is inspirational porn because the subject of it is not the main focus. The focus is for the able-bodied people to feel good about themselves. I'll give you another example. Say, for instance, a veteran is in a tough situation. Say they've lost their home and they're homeless. And a home builder says, I'm going to build this veteran a home, and we're going to put it on the news. And news show up, and the home builder's there, and the camera's in the home builder's face. And he's like, I did this because my uncle served in the army, yada, yada, yada. And I did this amazing thing, and I did so good. And then the news reporter cuts to somebody else, and there's a ribbon cut in, and then the story goes over. That's inspirational porn to me. Why? Because that person who was the subject didn't have a voice, didn't speak up, wasn't able to say, hey, this is the situation that got me into this homelessness, and how as a country are we going to address that so these type of things don't have to happen, and I don't have to get something, quote unquote, for free, even though I struggled to get to where I am today. Recognize inspirational porn, and then attack it. Figure out ways to make the subject of the media the focal point and let their story be told and not the narrative that's been told by others. Make sense? We can go to the next slide. Here's a couple of best practices to use. One, do not call us broken. Do not call us restricted. Do not call us limited. We are not defined by our disabilities, but it is part of us. So keep it simple. ask us how we want to be addressed, how we want to be described. I just want here at the bottom, person first or identity first language. So a person first example would be a person in a wheelchair, a person that has PTS, where you identify that person. Let's talk about the veteran community, a veteran or disabled veteran that has this condition. If we go on the other route, identity first, and they're okay with it, then you can say, yes, this is a disabled veteran or this is a blind veteran. But it's not the same language that everyone is okay with. As, because we are all individuals. We are all on a spectrum. We are all different. We can be the start of a change. We've gone into newsrooms. We've had reporters, journalists, and heads of newsrooms look at us like we were crazy because we gave them the statistics, we told them the situation, and in some cases we called them out on things that they have done. But my challenge to everyone here is when you look at media or you connect with somebody in the media, remember that we want to be represented. We matter. And when a story about one of us doing something encouraging or empowering happens, it empowers our entire community. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you to all our panelists. We're going to open it up to audience questions in a little bit, but I hope I could intrude for a few minutes and just ask a couple of questions about your presentation. And anybody can go ahead and answer if you have some good ideas around the issues that I'll bring up. And I'll just start by introducing myself to the audience real quick. My name is Russell Midori. I'm the president of Military Veterans in Journalism. I'm very grateful to be up here with my fellow members of the Speakers Bureau and talking to you about these issues that we have spent a really long time and put a lot of energy into getting this right, you know, and to sharing the ideas that we can with our colleagues in newsrooms. And what I want to ask you all about is, are there ways that journalists can ensure that they are being appropriately intersectional when they're reporting on disability issues and that they're not just focusing on one thing? And if you have any comments or thoughts on that, I'd love to get your opinions.
They could always ask a vet. They could go straight to the source and ask a vet. I think one of the biggest issues is in all of our fact checking and in all of our fact finding, we do not include the people it affects. So ask.
You know, I shared this story already with some of you. There was an article that came off of an article that I wrote about about a member of the Air Force that died. The family was supposed to get the flag. They took the flag back, but a news entity in Baltimore referred to this airman as a soldier in the headline. It is drives us crazy, right? Russell is a Marine. Caron is a sailor and a soldier. I am a sailor. A Navy SEAL is a sailor. We are not all soldiers. So yes, check with a veteran. Have more veterans in newsrooms for crying out loud. Does that answer?
It does, but I wonder, do you think that it requires a certain kind of moral courage to be able to ask those questions, not just of veterans, but of people who are in the disabled community, and if you're doing stories about them? What are the ways that journalists can kind of, I mean, maybe this is something that's kind of a new issue, right, in this world where, but isn't it kind of scary to ask somebody and just come out and say, like, what do you want to be called? And is there a way that you
So the way it was done with Zach was flat out wrong. In that was an employment situation. Right. It is illegal. But I think for me, if you're dealing with somebody with a disability that you know that you want to interview, how do you want to discuss your disability? Do you want to tell somebody about what your disability is? That what you would?
I think so. And like one of the things you can also do in those situations as a journalist is that you can also speak to the caregiver. You can speak to people that are connected with them so that you already have that language that they like or they are accustomed to or they respect prior to you actually having that sit down or that interview. But the other thing is, look, number one, Google. Google has it. Like it's here on Google. Do a little bit more research, and even better, be more than a Google researcher. Have that reference and resource. If you're a sports reporter and you're reporting on the Los Angeles Lakers, right? You'll have some resource or some statistic person that you can go to that gives you, LeBron James winning percentage. Go to the DAV, the Disabled American Veterans, which is a veteran service organization that publishes information about veterans, statistics about veterans, and they'd be more than happy to answer any question that journalists have.
You can also go to MVJ.
Oh, there you go. Watch out now.
MVJ has a wealth of resources when it comes to disability reporting, when it comes to veterans reporting. It should be a part of your toolkit. It should be a part of everybody's toolkit.
And a style guide.
And the style guide, yeah.
That's right. You can actually find that at mvj.network/disability-reporting-resources-library, or you could Google it. I want to talk to each of you about your personal experience serving on the Speakers Bureau, and just generally, what is so important about this to you, about this work that MVJ is doing and that you're contributing to as part of the MVJ Speakers Bureau?
That's kind of an emotional question for me because with MVJ, I found family. I really did. It's an honor to continue to serve. This is how I serve now. This is what keeps me going, is being able to speak truth to power and to speak on those things that other people won't say. I'm sure you can tell how shy I am. But MVJ has become, being on the Speakers Bureau first of all, the training was insane. The training was excellent. A lot of us, we all learned from each other. We all gleaned from each other. And in safe spaces, we were able to ask those questions. And even, my heart, Jimmy, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that you're getting the attention that you deserve, that you've earned. But with MVJ and the Speakers Bureau, it's opened my eyes, not just to how much power we have as journalists, but also to how much we're ignored. When you talk about reaching out directly to 250 news organizations and only a few responded, that's insane. And there needs to be some kind of accountability at the executive level, at the managerial level, to address the fact that very few news outlets have a veterans beat that deals with the people.
This is something that, to me, military veterans in journalism, when we first founded this organization, and we kind of had no idea what it was going to turn into, but this has been the crux of I would say, kind of our most difficult work, because journalists and newsrooms, they are very good in a lot of cases at calling out problems that they see in the world. That is their job. But they are not very good at getting called out. And I will tell you that I've worn through a few pairs of shoes knocking on newsroom doors to promote this training. And to me, it is, I got a lot of promises from people that they would follow. I mean, when you show up in their newsroom, they end up making promises. But a lot of newsrooms that did not follow through on this, and who don't see it as their responsibility to be influenced by other agencies that are trying to promote disability journalism or any other topic. But I'll say that that which applies to all of the things that we've learned about intersectionality in journalism applies to disability reporting. And just like almost every way that disabled people are held back by systems, this is kind of one of the last things that journalists have thought to address. And I'm very proud to be able to do the work of inspiring journalists and inspiring newsrooms to do the really important reporting on disability. I mean, even here in the city that we're in right now, when you have nearly 500 train stations and less than 1/5 of them are handicap accessible, right? And that means that not only is a disabled person, not only do they have to travel 4 or 5 extra stops to get where they have to go, right? But it basically shows, and this is actually the kind of the what's in it for me that I love to tell journalists about is like, hey, there are a million story ideas that come out of just even a cursory look at issues that affect disabled people, because the systems in our society will fix those problems that harm disabled people the very last. It'll be the last thing that they fix, you know? And so you can look at almost any system, from courts to transportation to corporate America to any of the systems that are structures around us, and you can find stories based on how they treat disabled people and how they treat those who are ignored by society, especially those who don't have power, like the disabled and the homeless, right? And so it is really fulfilling for me to be able to be a part of this. But I don't want to suck up all the oxygen in the room. I would love to see if anybody else has some questions that is related to the work of reporting on disabled people, or the work of military veterans in journalism, or really, I mean, anything that you want to talk about. So if there's any audience questions, we'd love to take some. Yeah, go ahead, Tim. Oh, sorry.
My name is Tim Pena. I run an organization here called Veterans Justice Project. We basically work with vulnerable and incarcerated veterans. I also sit on the continuum of care for New York City, people with living experience, and as well as on the New York City Veterans Task Force. This story with Neely really hits me hard, because I spent 5 months in a homeless shelter here in New York City when I first came here from Arizona. It's a violent, chaotic shelter, and it's a veterans shelter. And I'm watching the video with Daniel Penny, who served in, I believe, in Afghanistan. We have been talking about, basically, no one really comes out of the military 100% whole. We all get damaged. We all know that. We all come out changed. And so my observation is, or my dilemma is, balancing the needs and the tragic incident on the subway between somebody who is in the middle of an incident and having a PTSD or a mental breakdown, and another person who was trying to mitigate that. I don't believe that it's a racial thing. It's been brought up in the news that this was a race thing. We talked about this yesterday. Diversity, when you're in the military, there is really no black, white, gay, or whatever. You know, you have my back, I have your back. That's what we're there for. So I'd like to get your take on that, of how we balance that, because we basically have two people who are suffering a mental illness, mental health issue, and how do we address that so that it's fair?
I wanted to jump in and just say, so I'm just going to say one thing. It is racial, and it doesn't mean that Daniel Penny had racist tendencies toward Jordan Neely. But the fact that Jordan Neely was in that position is because not only was he Black, he was also disabled. And so when we're reporting on that stuff, we actually have to bring all of it up because it all matters. Like with the facts that I brought up initially, where I said 26% of the population, but also the two racial groups that have the highest rate of disability are Native Americans and Black Americans, which automatically makes it a racial issue. And that doesn't, and see, here's the difference though. All reporting around disability is very personal focused. Like, here's these two guys, they met up in a headlock and then one died and oh no. And not, hey, here's these two people that both got caught up in a very broken system and didn't get the help they needed. And I don't know Daniel Penny's situation because we didn't do any reporting on it. We solely focused on Jordan and how he was acting off and he was in the subway and he was frightening people. But all of that is racial. A Black man got on the subway and said, "I'm hungry," and started screaming. That scares people because we live in a racialized society. And so we can't take it out, but we need to report on it better. And so it doesn't mean that everything has to be, it's a Black-white issue. It's not. We live in a racist society. We live in an ableist society. We as journalists need to be fighting those ideas because that's what the problem is that we all have these bad ideas. Today, I was supposed to be in New York and I pushed it and pushed it and pushed it and kept saying, okay, I'm gonna come. And I kept switching my flight because in my mind, I have to be in the room because that's an ableist mindset. I have to be there. And then last night I was like, what are you doing? You're a disabled journalist going to a disability event. They can figure out how to do it remotely and it will be safe. But that's my own ableism wrapped up in my own head. So all of these things we have to think about, we have to investigate our own ideas. And it's not a bad thing. Like, we all are racist. We are all ableist. So that story is racialized, but not in the way you think. And it's okay to bring those things up and talk about them.
I'll also say that both of those individuals are part of my tribe. They're part of my people. They're part of us. And there's, even as service members, it's never right to take someone else's life. And until we honor each other's lives and recognize each other's values, situations like this will continue to happen. But think about all those people that surround there that didn't recognize that life was being taken away. It didn't think that that person had enough value, that Jordan didn't have enough value to step in and to break that up.
That he wasn't considered a full person.
You got it. He wasn't considered a full person. He was
subject to
devalued.
vigilantism. It's okay that someone attacks him because he's not a full person. That's the perception of it. And then when they called Jordan Neely unhinged, right? And I'll mention, I think Kara made a good point that it was, I guess, gracious that they didn't just kind of assume that Penny, that his killer had, PTSD and that he's also unhinged. But that is wrapped up in this contention that this man is not really a full person, and he is deserving of whatever vigilantism someone on the train thinks that he's deserving of.
I wanted to add to that and address something directly. Yes, we fight together. We join the fight together. We volunteer together. But don't for 1 second believe that there is not racism inherently entrenched in the services. Whether you are still serving, whether you are a veteran, it is inherently the vigilantism you just spoke of. He felt he could do that because he's seen that over and over and over again against Black men. It started with George. right here in New York. But don't ever, ever think that it can be about race and someone not be racist. But in order to be racist, you have to be part of the power structure. And as a white man, putting a black man in a chokehold in a public place is inherently racist. That kind of vigilantism. Because one of the reasons you see so many black people die at the hands of police is because the origin of police is inherently racist. They were slave catchers. That's where that came from. So when we talk about respecting one another, PTSD doesn't just come from war. It also comes from racism. It also comes from racism. And there's a DNA shift that has been studied over and over again about generational trauma. That is something that we have to look at, and it is okay to call it out. You can call a thing and not offend someone, or even worry about offending someone. The truth needs no defense, but we cannot ignore where we live, who we live among, and that these things continue to happen.
Well, that was a great question, Tim. Thank you very much for that. Does anybody else have questions? Anything else you want to contribute to this discussion?
We actually have an online question.
All right.
I'm going to share from Gabriel Arana. The question has come up about disability reporting and how precisely to talk about disabled people. Should we present disability as a limitation that requires an accommodation, or as some people see it, as something that is part of their identity, that has upsides and downsides like any other characteristic? Or does it depend on how the person and does it depend on the person, and are there different ways to talk about it? Would love some advice.
Yes, on the last one. It depends on the person, and ask them how they'd like it, how they would like to be explained, how they would like their disability to be explained or not explained. That's it. We are so used as journalists to interviewing everybody every day. I don't know why this is such a hard concept, saying, do you want to define yourself, for how should I define you? That's it.
And don't make assumptions. You know, it's easy to ask people, and that's the thing, is that journalists have to be fearless. That's part of the job description, you know? And so you have to ask people, and even if it makes, welcome an awkward conversation. A lot of disability stories don't get told because journalists are afraid of an awkward conversation, And that is really, that's cowardice. It's cowardice, and it leads to misinformation. It leads to incorrectly, But really, it is as simple as being willing to talk to people who you don't necessarily know, people who live different lives, and that's just part of journalism, right? And also having the courage to not make assumptions, to ask them how they want to be referred to. I read an article. It said someone suffers from dwarfism, and I don't know if they asked them if they're suffering. If they're suffering, yeah, that's not, So don't make an assumption that person is suffering from whatever condition affects them. That's something to ask about,
I also think it's interesting because we also talk about the audience, right? So a lot of times when able-bodied people are producing media about someone with a disability, the audience is not the person with the disability. It's not that community. It's the able-bodied community. So they're going to speak in terms, they're going to say things in terms that are key triggers to that audience that, let's be honest, part of media and journalism is, we've talked about this in our training, is ad revenue and viewership. So sometimes that scandalous headline that says that someone is unhinged, that says that, disabled people are broken, these type of things, they pay the bills. So it's really about that audience, that subject, that material is written for, and then how do you include all of us to be more inclusive so that it describes us in a way and it presents in a way that's not offensive, but collaborative and inclusive.
I want to mention on that, Jimmy, that's a great point. And also, stories are written from an ableist perspective, for sure. But your audience is not necessarily. And that's an assumption that editors make about their audience, right? And this is part of why, when we looked at like one of the places where we did our news training was in Jacksonville, and it was important for us to share with them, like, hey, just so you know, your audience is disabled, like a lot of them, almost a majority in a lot of circumstances, and so. So it is something, but one thing that I want to just I think this is kind of a nice way to to bring this conversation full circle, is also mentioning that journalists are disabled too. And I wonder if our panel can offer any thoughts about how to be inclusive of disabled people in the workforce in newsrooms. If anybody has any thoughts on that.
I'd be happy to. I was working for, and
Oh, sorry. Do we?
Yeah, we're running out of time. Are we out of time?
Oh, Kara. Okay.
Kara, okay.
Kara, yeah, Kara, go ahead.
I just wanted to jump in and say that, so there are you do have disabled colleagues in the newsroom with you. You just don't know it. And you are probably in an ableist newsroom because they don't feel comfortable sharing that. I'm not saying that everybody runs around saying, I've got, Crohn's or whatever, but they will ask you for an accommodation. They will feel comfortable to ask for an accommodation if you have a newsroom that is open to discussing disability in an open way and a non-ableist way. And so when I do trainings, I usually am like, look, this is a safe space. Say whatever weird stuff you want to say, and I'm not going to come down on it, but we are going to walk through it. And the surprise and the learning that happens is so quick, because it's like, I won't mention some of the things that have been said because some of them are pretty bad, but we have to be open in newsrooms to making mistakes. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that I've heard from newsrooms all the time where they're like, well, we just don't do it because we don't want to get trolled. We don't want to this, we don't want to that. And it's like, well, maybe hire a disabled person, maybe hire more than one, maybe open your newsroom up so that accommodations are easy to ask for. You can't run away from this anymore. It's not possible, not with COVID. And so I think that's something that we all need to think about, is that disability is in our future, and you either reckon with it now or you end up in the abyss like the rest of us. And I love that Russell used a dwarf headline, that someone suffers from dwarfism, because my favorite headline that comes from my former employer, CNN, is my friend John is a marathon runner, and I tell this story every time because I think it's so ridiculous. He was 46 when he started running, and the best headline they could do was, dwarfism didn't stop this man from being an Ironman participant. And I was like, he's running with dwarfism. So no, it didn't stop him, because he didn't take his dwarf hat off and start running. He's a dwarf. So please stop running from it. You newsrooms, stop running from disability. It's okay.
All right. Yeah. If we have any more questions or any more thoughts that we want to share, yeah, go ahead.
Just as a quick one for the end, I'm wondering if anyone has any examples of journalists or outlets who think that are getting it right at this point.
MVJ.
That might be one for Kara,
Yeah.
Kara, because she's got, might be best suited for that.
I would say I gave the example of NBC Universal, who's trying to do more with their newsroom, and Lucy Bustamante, who's doing some stuff nationally as well. The War Horse, another great example of a great organization that's doing stuff reporting military and veteran affairs in a fair and productive way. They're out there. I will say there's a lot more examples of the opposite that are out there, but we're seeing more and more of a shift, and we want to be part of that shift.
And just like Kara said, a big part of that shift is hiring more disabled people, hiring more veterans as well, which we obviously advocate for, and military veterans in journalism. But having a staff that is diverse enough, and not just diverse across the usual part of the diversity pie that talent agents look at, but really looking for a diversity of experience, people who have walked in different types of shoes, or maybe they didn't walk at all, right? But people who come from different backgrounds, having them on your team will make your team better. And this is kind of the promise of diversity that is truly realized, is that when you have a diverse team, you know, when you send people, I can't tell you how many times I've been on an all-white team of journalists covering a black community and something that's happening in that community, and how much more difficult it is for us to do a good story about that, because we don't have people who necessarily relate to the struggles that are offering ideas, you know, that are represented in that community. The same is true for disability reporting. The same is true for reporting on veterans issues, and having a single veteran in your newsroom, or no veteran in your newsroom, right? And people don't even know who they're talking to, and they call up a base after something happens, you know? And so this is why newsrooms can't be hiring one type of person to serve such a pluralistic audience, you know? And go ahead, Karan, we'll let you take it away, because I think we're just about ready to wrap.
Also, I had to change my language about myself. I had to change my language about myself, because I used to be in the oppression Olympics too. You know, I have this and I have that. No, I am this. I am disabled. I am a woman. I live with, not I suffer from, I live with major depressive disorder. I lived with physical disabilities that are invisible. I live with and among people who deserve that respect. But I had to change my language as well. And it changes how I move through the world. When we go into these newsrooms and we speak to them, using the language I use about myself matters as well. So I think that's a huge part of it.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for attending this panel. Do I?
No, you're good.
Did I pass it on? Sorry. I'm the
Thank
worst
you
leader.
again to all of our amazing panelists. This was a phenomenal event, and hopefully, well, I can commit this is not our last time having this conversation. And thank you everyone who participated with us today, either in person or virtually. And let's have a great afternoon.
Thank you.